Hello friends, welcome back to FoodPrints. I'm so glad you're here with me because the big idea we're exploring today is there is more than one way that plants can reproduce. That's right, plants have the amazing ability to make new plants, which means they can reproduce. And different plants have different ways to make that happen. In today's lesson, we're going to look at 3 of those ways: seeds, bulbs, and tubers. Okay, so what do you already know about how plants make new plants or reproduce?
New plants come from seeds.
That's right. For most of us, when we think about how to grow a new plant, the first thing that comes to mind is seeds. And that makes sense because with a little help from pollination, seeds are a very common way that many plants reproduce. Like these lima beans here. Lima beans are actually seeds from which new plants will eventually emerge. But some plants don't use seeds to reproduce, and therefore they don't need any help from pollinators. They use their own plant parts instead. Let's take a look. Here we have a collection of different plant parts. Let's take a moment to observe them and allow our minds to wander. How might these things help their plants reproduce? Got any ideas yet? Let's start with something called a bulb. A bulb is the part of a plant that grows underground just beneath the stem, and it's where the plant's food is stored. I have here 3 types of bulbs: an onion bulb, a flower bulb, and a garlic bulb, which we're going to use as our example. This garlic bulb, which is sometimes referred to as a head of garlic, looks like something you'd buy at the supermarket or farmer's market, right? And if you've worked with garlic before, you know that a garlic bulb is made up of individual cloves. Well, these cloves inside the bulb are what the garlic plant uses to reproduce. If it's in healthy soil, a new garlic plant comes out of or emerges from a clove just like other plants come out of seeds. The difference is, unlike plants that produce seeds using pollination, the garlic plant can make a bulb all by itself. Now, there is another way that plants can reproduce, and it's through something called a tuber. Like a bulb, a tuber also grows underground, and it's where a plant stores its food. But what makes it different from a bulb is that a tuber grows further down at the bottom end of a root. A good example of a tuber is a potato. A potato is a tuber because it's the swollen part of the plant that grows underground at the bottom of the root. And just like with a bulb or seed, a tuber is what some plants use to reproduce. For example, take a closer look at this potato. You see the little crevices in the skin? Those are called eyes, but not the kind of eyes that allow you to see. When it's time for the potato plant to reproduce, new sprouts start to poke out of the eyes, and those sprouts will make a whole new potato plant. Pretty cool, right? And just like with bulbs, plants that create tubers can do so all by themselves. Now, we know that different plants can use seeds, bulbs, or tubers to make a new plant or reproduce. And we know that inside every seed, every bulb, and every tuber is the beginning of a new plant and a food source where the new plant will get the energy it needs to grow. But there's one more thing that seeds, bulbs, and tubers have in common. They all have some type of protective coating on the outside to protect what's inside. Okay, my young scientists, let's take a look at a dissected seed, a bulb, and a tuber, and see if we can spot the protective coating, the food source, and most important, the baby plant. Now, remember, the parts we identify might have different names, depending on if you are talking about seeds, bulbs, or tubers, but they all have the same function or job, which is reproduction. Here's a lima bean seed that's been dissected. You can see the baby plant here, which is also called the embryo. The food source is right here, and that's called the cotyledon. And here is the protective coating, or seed coat. All seeds have these 3 things: an embryo, a cotyledon, and a seed coat. And together, they allow their plant to reproduce. This is a garlic bulb that's been dissected. This here is the baby plant, which is also called the flower bud. The food source is here and is referred to as the scales, and the protective coating is this part right here. and we call it the tunic. All bulbs have these three parts: a flower bud, scales, and the tunic. And together, they allow their plant to reproduce. Last but not least, we have a tuber that's been dissected. This is the baby plant here. It is also called the eye or embryo. Over here is the food source or the flesh, and the protective coating is called the potato skin. And you probably know what I'm going to say at this point, right? Yes, all tubers have eyes, flesh, and protective skin. And together, they allow their plant to reproduce. So now you know, plants can reproduce or create new plants many different ways, including through seeds, through bulbs, or through tubers. Plants are pretty amazing, right? Is there a plant that you're interested in growing? If so, now you can read all about that plant and find out how it reproduces. Well, that's all for now. Thanks again for joining me today to learn about plant reproduction. See you next time.